Today we're going to do a special video on liver shunts. A lot of this information can be found in my book, Keeping Your Pets Naturally Healthy. We also have blogs on all kinds of different liver diseases, including liver shunts. But I thought I'd give you a little bit of a more in-depth explanation so that you have maybe a visual picture in your mind and then what to look for. Liver shunts, a lot of times we think of only occurring as a congenital problem in certain breeds. Yorkies are probably the #1 breed that I saw this in. I saw a lot of Maltese with it as well. Tends to be smaller breeds. However, Old English sheepdogs and Irish wolfhounds also get liver shunts congenitally. So that seems a little bit weird to me. So certainly if you have a puppy that is diagnosed with a congenital liver shunt, those parents should be taken out of the breeding program, clearly. So if you're a breeder or if you're going to buy a puppy, you want to ask if there are any congenital problems within the lines and make sure that you're not setting yourself up for an issue. Because if you have a dog with a congenital liver shunt or a cat with a congenital liver shunt, if it is a surgical repair, you're going to spend a lot of money and deal with problems, a lot of problems. So one of the things that we see with these animals is they tend to be tiny. We had a litter of kittens at our office once that we were bottle feeding, and my office manager had this little teeny tiny kitten, and one of my head technicians was bottle raising one of the litter mates, and they would bring them to work every day because they had to be fed throughout the day. And when the kittens were about 4 weeks old, generally, a 4-week-old kitten is going to weigh about a pound. And I have a picture somewhere where we held up the two kittens side by side, and the one was a really fat-bellied, beautiful, a little over 1 pound kitten, and the other one weighed about 4 ounces and was this little teeny tiny thing. And it ended up that the little teeny tiny one did have a liver shunt, and unfortunately he did not survive long term. So what is a liver shunt? So I really stink as an artist, so we're just going to pretend the diaphragm is up here, and here's the liver, and we've got liver lobes, okay? So that's our liver. So the portal, well, veins are blue, believe it or not. Portal vein comes in to the liver, and where is it coming from? Well, it's coming from all of the intestines that are wiggling around through here. It's coming from the spleen. It's coming from the pancreas. So all these different organs in the abdomen all drain into the portal vein, and then the portal vein goes through the liver and has all these branches. And the reason it does this is so that this blood flow goes through all the parts of the liver, and the liver does its job of detoxifying, taking things out of the bloodstream that it doesn't want to get to the rest of the body. So things like heavy metals or mycotoxins, things like that that need to be filtered out of the bloodstream. The liver performs over 500 functions, so it also makes albumin, which is one of the proteins in the body. It makes cholesterol. It helps with blood sugar and glycogen storage, which is energy storage. So if this blood flow does not filter out through the liver effectively, then those processes, those over 500 things that the liver does, cannot occur. So with a shunt, oh boy, I guess I'm gonna have to draw another funny looking liver. Okay, so with a shunt, we have the portal vein comes up to here, and then it either hooks up to something else and goes around the liver and does not filter, or it can do a little garden hose thing where instead of branching, it may have one main thoroughfare. So none of the rest of the liver is getting infiltrated. We can also have microvascular shunts. So instead of being one major throughway, it could be just a couple small throughways. And so we still are not infiltrating all of that liver tissue with the full blood flow. So when that happens, this liver tissue is not getting nourished, and it's also not getting the nutrients that it needs. And so the liver gets very small and can undergo cirrhosis, which basically is shriveling up of the liver. From a human aspect, we usually think of it associated with excess alcohol consumption causing cirrhosis of the liver. But mycotoxins, a lot of other things can cause cirrhosis. We see it with some long-term medications that are used in our animals, particularly things like anticonvulsants. So, other symptoms that we can get besides that stunted growth, let's say that maybe it's a slightly older animal that develops a liver shunt over time. They can have increased thirst and urination. We can see GI symptoms like vomiting and diarrhea. And an animal that has a significant shunt, because they're not detoxifying, ammonia, waste products build up in the bloodstream, and then they cross what's called the blood-brain barrier. So there's a barrier that keeps toxins from getting to the brain. But ammonia can cross that if it gets high enough in the bloodstream. And so we start seeing neurologic symptoms. When I worked in emergency medicine, I would have animals come in seizuring, and their underlying problem was a liver shunt. And of course, nobody thinks about that when you see a seizuring animal. It's not usually the first thing at the top of your list. A lot of times these animals will have other neurologic symptoms: circling, head pressing, standing in a corner with their head up against the wall, which to me, I equate that with 1, confusion, decreased vision, and 2, a headache. So if you have a headache, what do? You rub your temples. You kind of, that's what they're doing. They are literally head pressing into a wall. So when we see this in adult animals, one of my best cases was someone who asked for a consultation for their dog because the dog had urate crystals in the urine. And urate crystals are not normal. When we see them, we know that we either have a congenital problem or we have a liver shunt problem. So this was a 5-year-old adult large breed dog with urate crystals, and she wanted a special diet for that. And I said, I will not take this consultation until you have an ultrasound and rule out a liver shunt on the dog. And she went to her veterinarian and said, I need an abdominal ultrasound. I have to rule out a liver shunt on my dog. And the veterinarian poo-pooed her and said, no, we're not going to do that. We don't need to do that. And so she came back to me and says, my veterinarian won't do it. And I said, then I won't do the consultation to make a diet. We need to know. And after a couple of months, she finally convinced the veterinarian to do the ultrasound. And lo and behold, yes, the dog had a liver shunt. And that's why it was making the urate crystals and potentially urate stones and obstruction. So yes, we can make a diet for that. So a lot of times when we have adult animals, it's more of a microvascular shunt than one of these main shunts going on. And so urate crystals and urate stones, if we're seeing those, we really need to get down to the bottom of this and see, do we have a liver shunt? Is it something that can be managed medically? Can it be managed with diet? Or is this going to be a surgical problem? So how do they fix this surgically? What they would do is, if we've got this main shunt going through, they put a ring around this. It's a constrictor ring to squeeze down this vessel. And what it does is it then forces the vessel to make branches. And so over time, we'll get more branching out through the liver and more normal filtration of the blood. So the constrictor ring, it's an involved surgery. It's usually done by specialty center with a board certified surgeon. I don't personally know of any general practitioners who are doing that particular surgery. It's a little bit complicated. But I have seen it work really, really well. It's not an immediate fix because it takes time for those blood vessels to grow and infiltrate that area. So, because it's kind of like if you cut off the blood supply, it has to make new blood supply somewhere, so that's what it will do. If we don't do surgery and we have an animal, unfortunately, anesthesia in an animal with a significant shunt is very tricky because they can't process the anesthesia. So you would want to choose anesthetics that are filtered more through the kidneys, processed and metabolized more through the kidneys rather than through the liver. A lot of times we find out an animal has a liver shunt when they come in for their spay neuter at 6 months old, which we need to move away from that, but that's a different video. So they come in for their spay or neuter at 6 months old and they don't wake up from anesthesia. They sleep and sleep and sleep and sleep, and maybe 3 or 4 days later they wake up, or they wake up and then go right back to sleep, and we can't get these animals to wake up. And it's because it's taking them so long to process the anesthesia. So this is why it is critically important to have that pre-anesthetic blood work done even on a young animal. Because you may have an animal who doesn't have a main shunt, but it does have enough of a shunt that it's not going to be able to process the anesthesia. And you don't want to find that out the hard way when they don't wake up from surgery for 3 days. So pre-anesthetic lab work, really, really critical. What would we be looking for on lab work that might tell us that we have a shunt going on? So remember I said that the liver makes albumin, so a decrease in albumin, which is one of the proteins. So if that's really low, it could be because we don't have enough liver tissue to make it. It also makes cholesterol. So if we have a very low cholesterol, now if you do a fasting blood sample, cholesterol will be a little bit low, but these are going to be significantly low if we have a significant shunt. We also will see a decrease in total protein, and that's because total protein is made up of albumin plus globulin, and the globulin is not made by the liver. But let's say a normal albumin is 3.5 and a normal globulin is 3.0, so your total protein would be 6.5. Let's say your total protein comes up at 4 and your globulins are still 3, that means your albumin's only 1, which if it was 1, you'd have significant symptoms, you would know. Those two will go hand in hand, that low albumin with the low total protein. And when you look at your total protein, you'll see the globulins are normal, but it's the albumin that's low. We also can have a low blood sugar because the glycogen is not being stored and released from the liver, which is an energy source. And then the other one that will be low is BUN. And again, it's because it's not being, the nutrients are not being processed. So when we see this, and it's going to be, these are going to be either at the very low end of normal or outside the normal range on the low side. So if you have pre-anesthetic blood work done and you go, oh my gosh, look, all of those things are low, maybe we have an issue. And if you think back and go, well, you know, the pet does seem smaller than it should be, or the pet seems more confused or wobbly than it should be. Maybe they don't have a good appetite. They've got some vomiting and diarrhea. Make sure you get this blood work done, particularly prior to surgery. And then something else, if these are low and you're suspicious, something else that can be done is a bile acids test. And that will give you a better idea as well. So what do we do if they're not surgical, but they're symptomatic? Let's say they can't undergo anesthesia. So we give something called lactulose. Lactulose basically makes them have diarrhea. And you give them enough, it's a liquid, usually given 3 times a day. You give them enough to keep the stool soft. And what we're doing is we're clearing waste products out of the bowel faster so that those waste products aren't crossing that blood-brain barrier. And we, for years and years when I was in practice early, and it's not used as often now, is an antibiotic called neomycin, which again changes the microbiome in the bowel and keeps those waste products from building up and going to the brain. And so we decrease the seizures and the central nervous system signs. This isn't a way to manage these animals long term, but it might be something that is used short term by your veterinarian. I think a lot of them might jump to metronidazole. I don't really like that, but neomycin's hard to get these days. But this is how we used to treat them in the hopes that we could get them well enough to be able to go to surgery. So it is a life-threatening problem with these congenital shunts if it is a major shunt, like our little tiny kitten that we had that didn't make it. So if you, especially if you have one of these breeds that is more prone to this, and you have a puppy or a kitten that is just not thriving, they're not growing, they're the runt, which, by the way, for those of us who are into the Chinese medicine thing, this is a Jing deficiency. You can get all the right parts and pieces put together correctly. All right, hopefully that helps. For more information, keeping your pets naturally healthy, and also our blog on liver shuts.